friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me ears, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the MC Lars podcast. This is episode 60 with Erin Tonkon. It is October 21st, 2019. This year is just flying by, and I can't believe we made it to episode 60. We had Suzanne last week, and we have Erin this week. So we've had 4 women on the podcast so far. I want to make that a higher percentage. It's cool to talk to Erin. She's a friend of my wife's and a friend of mine too. She made the speech at our wedding. She's a producer. She's a engineer. She's amazing. She was worked with this guy, Tony Visconti, who was David Bowie's main producer friend. And so Erin was kind of like his assistant, Tony's assistant. She did her undergrad at the NYU Clive Davis Institute, and she did a lot of work on Bowie's last record, Blackstar. So she tells a lot of David Bowie stories. She talks about the changing industry. She talks about what it was like to see David Bowie's work ethic as someone who looks forward and talks about what he's working on now as opposed to like obsessing about his past work. And for someone with such an iconic discography, that's a really cool message for an artist. We end the podcast with a song from Blackstar called "'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore" that Erin sings on, and the title of that song is based on a 17th century play by John Ford. So that's what's up. So we'll get into that. I want to thank everyone who came to see me on the Oakley Dokley tour. Thank you, Oakley Dokley. Great tour mates, great turnouts, great venues. It was tight. I have an exciting announcement. I am going to Russia in a few weeks. The beginning of November, I'm doing a show in Moscow with my man John Thatcher Longley on the drums, a podcast classic guest. And so I've never been there. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll have stories about that adventure, and that's going to be cool. So, oh yeah, be sure to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/MCLars. I'm doing some MCU songs, Marvel Cinematic Universe songs this week. And I want to give a shout out, as always. This episode is brought to you by the new Patreon sponsors, John E., Joshua Wood, and Thomas Maloney. And shout out to the old ones, Keith Davis, Lane Heggie, and Darth Benton. I really appreciate y'all helping me keep going. This is my interview with Erin Tonkon, an amazing producer, amazing engineer, and an amazing friend. Check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Erin Alyssa Tonkon.
What's up, Lars?
Hey, what's up? Thanks for being on the podcast.
So happy to be here.
So you came over and you're the first guest who instantly recognized the mics.
Instantly. SM7B, little widely known fact, it was the Michael Jackson Thriller album. I don't know if we can talk about Michael Jackson anymore.
Are these mics canceled?
But I know one mic who is.
And he held, that's good. He held the mic, right? When he was singing, or was it on a stand?
I think he might have held it. I have.
Michael Jackson. No, I don't know. I usually see a lot of metal guys and women screaming into these mics, holding them.
I feel like Michael Jackson. We shouldn't. Yeah, you can hold them.
That's right. I do a lot of my vocals right here at this desk because with Logic and the plugins, I can just. It sounds fine.
Yeah.
I sometimes go in the closet behind you and record in there. But the role of a producer takes that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to ask you about, if I'm right. And takes 1,000 of those or 100 of those little home recordings in the studio, finds out what's special about them, makes them sonically great, and tries to recapture that magic in a way that is timeless. That's my understanding of a producer. What is yours?
I think that's like a really good understanding. I always start with people because people have a better understanding of like film for some reason. Like it's kind of like the director of a film. Like you are the creative controller basically of everything that's happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes it looks different for different people. I'm a producer that comes from a heavily engineering background. So have a lot of that I bring into it. Some producers come from strictly, an artist or songwriter. So they might not be thinking as much about engineering choices, but, they come from different backgrounds. So that's a great, description that you just said. But yeah, like the kind of the creative control and the overseer. And, at times you're an arranger. At times you are, making sonic choices from, microphones to compression to whatever outboard gear. At times you are a therapist, it just puts on whatever hat is needed for the artist.
And in some cases, sometimes you are, not in your case, obviously, a drug dealer.
Absolutely.
A provider of clothes, like helping with their lifestyle image.
Sure.
And it's very interesting that looking back, like you used the movie industry analogy was good, but looking back in the day, it used to be such that the producers were also involved in generating the money. And that's kind of been relegated to both the artist and the label now, more so, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, I guess from a money standpoint, oh, sorry, I just hit the mic. Rookie mistake. From a money standpoint, I am often dealing with, okay, here's the budget. I have a manager who helps. Like, here's the budget. What studio can we use at this cost? How much do we have to do at my studio? How much can I retain from this? How much do we have to pay, if we need to hire session musicians or stuff like that. So there is still a deal in which I need to know how to like manage money, but I'm not in control of getting the money.
You don't have to generate it.
No.
And that's the experience with a lot of people listening to this podcast. It's a lot of like, Kickstarter and a lot of like, when your music's too weird for a label, you're going to have to figure out how to create it and release it. And sometimes you can't afford the Erin Tonkins. Sometimes you can't afford like the producers who get you the good studio. And that sometimes your project suffers. You know what I mean? Like you can do it DIY, but I always found my best stuff was always with people in a good studio who were able to give it that polish.
Totally.
And so what are ways artists finance working with you?
I mean, I think, there's great stuff like Kickstarter. I mean, this is it's an awkward conversation because we're all out here kind of struggling, it's and if there's not a label behind it, there are some artists that I will take on that don't necessarily have the budget, and we're all kind of working on a sliding scale for one thing, but that's not to say, and I don't want to say that like people deserve to be paid for what they do, and if they're at a certain level, they do deserve to be paid properly. But if someone doesn't have, the budget to hire a big producer, a big studio, I always say, get the most important thing in a great song is like a great arrangement, and if you can focus on, a really great song is going to translate if you record it, at Electric Lady, or if you record it in your second bedroom. I mean, a great song is going to translate. It might not be able to get radio play, but if you have a great song and you can get people to listen to it, throwing all the money at it is not going to make the difference between a good song and a bad song. Right.
That's really like a bad script. It's not going to make a great movie.
Exactly. Think about Daniel Johnston who just died. Phenomenal music. Some of the worst recordings you'll ever hear.
Right.
But great songs that like stand the test of time. Now that's not to diminish what I do and the power of a really well recorded, well mixed, beautifully sounding song. And that comes down to reaching out to people that you admire their work. And there are also really talented people that aren't necessarily at the top of their game, or you might be surprised as to what some people charge, or how some people are willing to work with you. There are artists that I'm really inspired by that I'm willing to come up with some sort of a deal to work with them.
How common is it for a label or an artist to pay a producer less on the front end, but for he or she to get points on the back end? Does that still happen?
It still happens, and I definitely have some deals like that, but it's kind of, it's not a great deal from my perspective, right, because points don't translate the way that they used to.
Right.
So we'll definitely negotiate that. And that's a way to say like, okay, you respect me for my time and you are willing to say like, you are deserving of sharing in a part of this music if it is successful, but doesn't have the negotiating power that it used to.
Because you're like, okay, that's nice of you, but it's not like when Steve Albini was like, he wasn't going to get the in utero royalties. Mm-hmm. That was more of a like, oh shoot, are you serious, bro?
Right.
That was a different era.
Right. That was a different era. That doesn't, now it comes down to if you get sort of sync licenses into a television or film or commercial. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about points. nowadays is a cut of that.
And so here's a question. If you're in a studio and you play like some chords on the piano or come up with a riff, are you the type of producer who asks for publishing, or is it kind of like, these are my services, it's all inclusive?
For me, that's a part of my services for sure, and I will throw in input. Again, I'm not a producer though that comes from a heavy songwriting background. So there are producers that are producer/songwriters that might say, hey, I wrote that chord. That was my idea. I, own this percentage. But for me, it's like, I'm not doing that constantly. Yeah. And I think that's part of my service, part of my job. And
I found it's the most awkward thing I found is trying to talk about percentages of who wrote what on a song after the fact. Because everyone's going to want more. And if you give them a little bit, they're going to want, you know what I'm saying? You give someone 6.7%. It's like, it gets really weird.
Yeah, it gets crazy. And I think it's just best to clarify everything on the front end. That's the best way to do it because, my concern and like why I ended up like getting a manager to deal with all the money stuff is like, I need to be the good guy and I want to be that. And you maintain a relationship with artists and you get really close with people that you're working with. And I don't want to have to bring in these ugly conversations about money and start going toe to toe about what things look like after the fact. Right.
Because that's helpful having a manager, Erin, because it can so easily, more than in any other industry, we tour together, we all hang out together. It can get weird.
Sure.
Quickly.
And I think the answer to that is just figure out everything on the front end and I was taught like when I was in school, like I don't always have a contract, but it's good advice. And sometimes when I have really had one, especially if it's someone you're close to, it really helps. So just get that conversation out the get-go and just whatever. It can just be an email. It doesn't have to be this formal thing. It could be like, okay, so we're agreeing to like, we're splitting the publishing on this song 50-50, or we're agreeing like you get the publishing, but I'm, you're paying me this up front, and that's the deal, or, whatever, just something in writing so that you just don't have to think about anymore. You can focus on what's important, which is like creating music.
Songs that you care about.
Exactly.
And this is what's interesting. I've found younger producers and MCs. And when I was young, it was like, this is like so inconceivable that you ever make a dime off what you create. So to like negotiate money seems like unnecessary. But anyway, this business stuff, you got your head together on that. I'm proud of you, Erin.
Thank you, Andrew.
Let's talk about, speaking of first things first, you went to NYU? I did. And you studied music.
Yeah, I studied, I went to the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, which is at Tisch at NYU. And yeah, I have a bachelor's of fine arts in recorded music.
That's a pretty specialized degree.
Highly specialized. I believe it's the only recorded music degree that exists.
Wow. Did Richard Good Goose, did he go there too?
Yes.
Was he in the Clive Davis school?
Yes.
Oh, but you didn't know him till after.
We went at different times.
Oh, okay. He's older.
I took a little detour.
Okay.
And then wound up back in school. So I was
so you took a little detour before college?
In the middle of college.
Understandable. I did at the end of college.
Yeah.
That's pretty tight. So you graduated with your BA in...
BFA, sorry.
BFA in fine arts. What is it?
I earned those 20 extra credits or whatever. Bachelor of Fine Arts in Recorded Music.
And did you know you wanted to be a producer? Or what was your dream? That was your dream?
Yeah.
And then suddenly you were working with Bowie.
Well, that was while I was in school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I went to, I knew I wanted to be a producer since I was like 16. It was, and I initially went to Emerson College in Boston, left to deal with personal demons, and then went back to school at NYU. And while I was away from school, I had interned at a bunch of recording studios, really got into engineering, kind of knew my way around, learned Pro Tools, got really proficient in that. And then I went to Clive Davis, and all the other students were kind of like getting internships. They were like 18 years old, getting their feet wet. I was like 22 when I started there. And one of my professors, Nick Sansano, who's a big producer, he did like a lot of Sonic Youth records and a bunch of really awesome stuff. Belle Biv DeVoe, he produced.
Classic.
Favorite.
Diverse roster.
Gotta diversify. Anyway, so he was saying to me, he's like, you should really, you should find a mentor. You've already interned at studios. You've done all that. You need to find someone that can really show you the ropes of how to be a producer. And so he asked me to sort of give him a list of names of producers I admired. And on the top of that list was Tony Visconti, who has done the vast majority of David Bowie's records. He also did T-Rex, Thin Lizzy, Morrissey, Gentle Giant, just like a ton of amazing bands. And so Nick reached out to him, and we didn't hear back for a while because they were actually in the process of releasing The Next Day, which was Bowie's first record after 10 years. It was highly secretive. The album came out. Tony finally hit me back up and said he'd love to meet me and interview. So I came to him. I brought him like my reel. We talked, and he said, cool, like I want to take you on as my summer intern. You start, next week. And my first day on the job, I get into the studio and he goes, I want you to sit down for a second. We have a client coming in today, and it's David Bowie. And I was like, I grew up with posters of him on my wall,
right.
And this was my first day working for a big producer. And he said to me, you probably just have to like wait, you maybe wait outside. We'll see if you can come say hi to him, whatever. And David got there and, immediately welcomed me in and had me, join in on the session. And then,
goodness.
I was hired full time after a month, and, 5 years later.
So that was one of your like examples of showing up and being ready and believing in yourself. Like,
sure.
Like a main opportunity that you wouldn't have if you hadn't. I don't know. It seems like that's a very rare, not many. That's like a dream story come true for musicians. Right?
Totally. And I had like really major tough life stuff happen, before I got to that point. And, it really made me feel like I was in the right place, but it was terrifying, and I really had to like suit up and show up. And it's that, that thing like luck is opportunity meets preparation or whatever, and that was like just, luck had little to do with it. I was in the right place at the right time, but I was prepared, and I was good at what I did. Right.
That's important. And it's this interesting thing, Erin, that I feel like I'm a little older than you, but like, we're, the same generation. It's this question of, if I'm going to go to college and I or my parents are going to invest in this bachelor's of arts or fine arts, is it worth it to take a gamble on media and the arts, or should I just do marketing?
Sure.
And I think that's that's something Ashley and I talk about constantly.
Yeah.
That like, she's like, well, if we ever had a family, I'd want that kid to be a scientist and an engineer. So otherwise it's not worth paying for college. And like, oh man, it's like, that's a wild thing to think as someone, for me, because I think that Ashley's right. So many people would agree with her that becoming a producer is an uncertain job, but it's something you had a talent for, you believed in, you found opportunities for, you're doing full time. And like, what would you say to a young person who's trying to figure all this out? If maybe a young woman or man who's in your shoes in college listening, who's trying to think, okay, should I do the arts thing or should I do business?
Well, I mean, for me, it was a question of, I knew I needed to be in New York. And the only way I was going to get there is if I were to go back to college. And my parents were very, very insistent on me getting a college degree. All my mentors at the time, before I went back to school, all the people I worked at in studios said, you absolutely do not need a degree to do this. And that's very true. But what it got for me, particularly going to the school I went to, was connections. I had no connections in the music industry. And connections are kind of everything, it is, right. There's a lot of talent out there, but if you can't get your foot in the door or can't get to the right people, unfortunately, and it's like I think it's like a travesty, but you're not going to get anywhere. So for me, it was a very expensive route to important connections. And, I was very, very fortunate to be able to focus the amount of time that I was able to focus on doing what I wanted to do. At the same time, I was working full time while I was in school full time, and it was exhausting. I actually got very sick after it, out of sheer exhaustion from working so hard. But, you do what you need to do to get ahead. So, you don't need a degree to do this. but you do need to put yourself in the position to be noticed.
That's good. So maybe...
And I will say this too.
Yeah.
It's fraught at this time, and with all the drama around college loan debts and everything like that. But, you know, my parents said to me, like, it's hard to get, I don't know, I struggle to say this, but it is harder when you don't have a college degree to get a lot of jobs. So it kind of doesn't matter what degree you have. Sometimes just having a degree can used to ensure you now can sort of, is a little bit of an extra benefit to like having a life where you can make a living. I know that, you know, nowadays, like, we were told that if you go to college, you'll make a good living and be able to afford a house and a family. And that's not the case anymore, but it's not going to hurt.
It can be if you do something super practical.
Sure.
And are like very only focus on the skrill, the money.
Right.
But that sucks. I don't know.
That's
easy to say as both people who didn't do like engineering degrees.
Right.
But I'm so happy with all the friendships music has brought me. I met your friend, my wife, Ashley, through doing music.
Absolutely.
And like all my best friends, all my favorite people. And you gave the amazing maid of honor speech at the wedding, which was like so beautiful because like you've been a big part of our friendship. You were like Ashley's first friend I met other than her band.
Yeah, I was the first to even hear about you. The night you two met, she was texting me about it.
Uh-oh. There
was some drama.
Hey, I know. And then I
caused a little drama.
Well,
but we're so happy to have you as part of the family.
Thank you, Erin. You were always very nice to me from the beginning. And I knew it was like, oh, Ashley has cool friends. Okay, she's cool.
Absolutely. I approved, you know.
Thank you. That's nice. I feel so emotional. Well, I didn't know we'd get into that, but okay. So something I'm guilty of with this podcast is that most of my interview subjects are dudes. Mm-hmm. And this is something I'm working to remedy. Mm-hmm. I think you're maybe like the 4th woman on the show out of 60.
Yikes.
And so that's not a very good percentage.
No.
So.
But it is a pretty better than
0.
It's a better percentage than the number of women that are actually doing what I do in the music industry.
Why do you think that is?
I think, and I'm asked this question all the time, and I do many, many panels on this topic, but I really think it's an issue of visibility, you know, and I think that when we're kids, we look to do things or we see people like us doing those things. And that's why I think there's like such a huge need for, you know, diversity in all fields so that kids can look and see like, oh, someone like me is doing that, you know, and there are very few. It's traditionally an old boys club, you know, and the music industry was built on racism predominantly, sexism heavily, you know, and a lot of like bad stuff that is also like super emblematic of America's history, you know, and the music industry just kind of followed that. And I think people don't think women are good at technical stuff. I think that people don't think women can take charge in situations or can't be trusted to be sort of like the creative oversight. And I think as a result, it just became this thing where I think it's at 2% of producers, engineers are female, which is like,
wow, that's low.
Huge. Yeah,
that's very
it's
low.
Really, really low. And I think, you know, a lot of women were pushed out early on. And you know, also, like, the hours can suck. It's hard to have a balance, which is something that I struggle with. You know, but that should be the case for anyone, not just for women.
Do you think there's something with the expectations with having kids, too?
Sure.
That it's like a lot of the nurturing falls on the wife, on the woman, but that's not necessarily fair. So that precludes them to these long hours.
I mean, I had someone, I'm not going to name names, but someone early in my career say to me, you need to choose now. Do you want a family or do you want a career? This person has been married 3 times and has 4 children, but they're male. You know, and I said, well, hold on a second. How come, you know, I didn't say this, but I thought in my head at the time I said career, you know, now I've walked that back, you know, but that's not fair. You know, I believe I should be able to have both.
I agree. I believe that too. And also with the ability to be in charge of your own schedule, your own production, not relying on big labels and big studios, being able to be more independent with your own ventures kind of makes that possible, right?
Absolutely.
Like if that's something you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just, I have a lot of independence in my career. Sometimes it sucks, because there's not a lot of security and there's no benefits. And there's times of, there's a lot of times of famine, sometimes of small feasts, but, mostly a lot of famine. But you learn how to make it work, and I'm taking steps to provide some sort of security for my future, in my career.
So you were doing some entrepreneurial stuff, and I know a lot of this is private, but like maybe say like a tiny bit about like your thought process in pivoting into that space and how that's influenced and maybe helped or taken away from your other projects. Like, how's that been?
Sure. So I'm starting a company. I have a couple business partners, and a lot of it I can't talk about, but what I can say is, we are all people who have been in the music industry for a certain amount of time and, notice some problems, including like a lack of community, a lack of affordable but high quality places to work. And all these people with common needs, like all these people saying in New York, especially, like, we want community. I know for myself, I'm always scrambling to find the right studio for the right project, and one size doesn't fit all, and there's a lot of people that are in the same position where we can't afford, a $4,000 a month studio rent or to build out a, $1 million studio and all this stuff. And it's like, how can we create something that creates community, creates workspace, and also kind of creates a task force of people to like go talk to Congress about having some sort of rights for musicians against Spotify, or having some sort of rights for producers. I mean, producers have no rights, and all these big problems and all these things I've learned through the years. So it's kind of this like threefold effect. And basically it's a multiple recording studio members club. So our goal is to, foster community, provide really amazing shared workspaces, do cool events, cool programming, mentorship, and kind of just get everyone together and starting in New York and hopefully going all over the world to like really take back the music industry. I mean, these people that are running it, that are calling all the shots are screwing us all over. And we are the people that are actually creating the music. And we are the ones that,
yeah.
And we are the ones that actually have the power, so we need to like kind of take that back.
Well, I think that's so cool, Erin. And I think that goes back to something you said earlier on the podcast is a good song means everything. A good music community means everything. And I don't get mad about a lot of things, but having been doing this for 13 years, 16 years, actually, like seeing the shift where the streaming services, YouTube, Facebook, all the corporations that monetized our attention and siphoned it away, then were able to decide what the monetary value was on what people like you and I create. And back in the day, it was a little more transparent because like I was very pro torrenting back in the day, as a way to get people to come see me. And now it's like, it's not so clear because you're on Facebook like, oh, this band is indie. Cool. Let me check out this video they're streaming. But it's not clear who's making the money and why. And it's this idea that everything's DIY, but it's so mediated.
Sure.
And so it's like having advocacy groups like that really are important. I think a good example is Patreon is a great way to like advocate for. Jack saw, okay, we need to have this intermediary thing where people can monetize their work better. And so it sounds like that's cool, like creating platforms and opportunities like that. And physical space is really needed.
And affordable, it's big on affordability, high quality, but affordability. Like this, every aspect of the music industry has changed for better or for worse to me, like this modern digital era, except for like the recording studio. And I love a big, beautiful recording studio, but it's not right for everyone at all times. And I don't need a big, huge studio to record overdubs, and it's, we're doing a lot, but what you said, like, absolutely. We were just the rug was pulled out from under all of us.
Yeah, and it was, yeah.
You know, and there's all this stuff now with like Spotify making artists thank them for putting them on playlists or something. I mean, it's sick. It's like Spotify like tells you have to thank them publicly for putting them on playlists. It's like, what is that playlist? You know, everything's about getting on a playlist now.
Sure,
are you kidding me?
It. And then intermediary companies that promise you they'll put you on a playlist take 20% and then don't deliver. And then when you call them out on a conference call, blame you for making a album about literature for not being marketable, hypothetically speaking.
Sure, hypothetically.
So
I don't know anyone who matches that description.
I'm so grateful that I've been able to 30% of my income, especially in the years when I was really touring, came from that.
Sure.
And I think Warped Tour and all those opportunities.
Yeah.
And like, that's exhausting.
Exactly.
But it's also, it's cool to have people like hear the songs and meet the fans. And I wonder, like, what's it like to be kind of the Wizard of Oz, the cloaked woman creating everything? When do you ever feel that connection with the fans? And like, what's it like birthing the albums you work on?
I mean, for me, I get like, you know, pleasure from watching the artists I work with succeed. Or, I mean, for me, like the big show with the audience cheering is like the artist saying like, oh my God, this is the album I always dreamed of making. And like, we did it. And like, thank you. You know, that's the stage for me. Like that's all I can ever ask for, you know? And then knowing that people are listening to that music and connecting to it and knowing that I was a part of making that come to fruition is what I want. Like I knew early on that I didn't want to be the person in the band on the stage, you know? And, I think that's an important thing to know about yourself. And I think there are a lot of producers and engineers that did want to be rock stars, and that can be a hindrance at times. I'm doing what I wanted to do. Yeah. You know, and I'm doing what I wanted to do. And I just feel so privileged to be able to do this for my job, you know, for people to trust me, you know, with their like most vulnerable moments and their most vulnerable pieces of work, and be able to translate that to you know, whoever will end up listening. So seeing the artists be happy when the album's out, or going to their show, or reading good press, like these are all ways, whereas like being like the midwife of the project, sure,
you're able to vicariously enjoy the thrill of it being received.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to know what went into that, you know, and know the blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, that, you know, usually literally went into it. And,
right.
And it's a lot of work, and yeah, I mean, that's my goal, is I'm of service to the artist, and everything else is just icing.
I think that's cool. Do you ever talk to an artist about their content? Like, oh, I don't think those lyrics are appropriate, or do you really want to, like, do you give their artists input on their lyrics ever? For
me, like my sort of whole philosophy is like, again, like I'm of service to the artist, and it depends on the artist. Some artists say, look, I am set in stone about what I wrote. This is what it's going to be. And I will state my position and my beliefs, but I'm not going to sit there and argue and get in, you know, a fight over it. If they are the artist, if they truly believe in their vision, then I got to respect that. If they're willing to fight for it, then, you know, absolutely. But, generally, you know, that's part of my job, is to say like, hey, like this would, you know, work better here, or maybe we could cut out some of these lyrics. And that's the ideal sort of position to be in. But I do respect when an artist is very, you know, headstrong about what they wrote. And, you know, it's sometimes it's like a painting and it has to be just so. And sometimes I'm wrong, you know, and sometimes they're right. Yeah. Right. And it's also like, that's interesting. That's a good metaphor. Every little piece of the album might be this painting that, as a producer, sometimes they probably want to abdicate that vision to you, but sometimes they want to keep it close and reveal slowly what it is they're trying to create. And so you're walking that tightrope, huh? Sure. And sometimes it's tricky. I mean, I have sat back when I should have fought harder in the past, and something did not turn out the way that it should have. And in hindsight, the artist maybe realized I was right, you know, and I've learned to be a bit more strong in my position. But but I'm not there to like bully people. And I've had labels say to me like, you need to turn this into like a pop record. And I'm just like, I'm not going to do that, because this person is not a pop artist, and it would be completely inauthentic. And I don't even think they'd be good at doing pop. That's not what they do well, but in the effort of selling records, some, labels have even said to me like, we want you to push it in this direction. And I don't believe in that. I believe in taking the arrangements and making them as best as they can be. And it's more like adding color to something, or like sculpting, than it is like creating something from, that's how I see like what I do is like the sculpting. Yeah. They bring me like the block, and I kind of help chip away.
Or you act as the hands and they tell you where to chip, right?
Sure.
Something like that.
Sure.
What do you think is the best produced album of all time? Whoa. Big question.
That's messed up.
Do you ever think about that?
No, I don't.
Interesting.
Is that like, I don't have there are productions that I'm a huge fan of, but I used to be, I grew up like really heavily worshiping like, like Velvet Underground and David Bowie and all these, huge, awesome bands and artists that everyone loves, and really like being this sort of like, my friend one time described it as like cultural necromancy, where you're just digging up old and just obsessing over them, and for me, like, I try to keep an open mind now. Like, there's cool stuff happening now, and to say that something is the best produced record of all time, like, it's so limiting, because it's like, well, what kind of record is it? Like, what was the intention of that record? Like, is it best produced for the songs that are on that record, or is it sound really great? Or, I just think it's an unfair question. I can't answer it.
I know people tend to like, it's interesting though, people will have an opinion that they feel reflects their brand, right?
Sure. And that's what I've tried to let go of.
Yeah. I'll tell you mine.
Yeah, tell me.
Okay. Is The Great Malenko by Insane Clown Posse.
Okay, well,
because
I know you, Andrew.
Very, very much a step up for them.
Okay.
Sounds great. It's just, you listen to that record, it's special. But like you're talking about cultural necromancy. Yeah, it's well produced. It came at the well, we don't have to get into the whole ICP talk, but when it came,
on your rants, Ashley will have something to say about this.
It was pre nu metal,
okay.
but like Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols is on it, Alice Cooper.
Oh wow!
It has Slash plays on it, wow. So it has a lot of cool guitar sounds without being too. It's not like rap rock.
Okay,
and it's very funny and weird.
Awesome.
So, but my point is that like, that album also was a big commercial success for them, and I have a nostalgic memory of it.
Sure.
And so those two things influence my opinion of it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it's easy to be nostalgic for older music, and I think as a producer, you can't fall into that trap of being like, oh, music peaked in the 70s.
Right. And that's when I was a teen, that's how I was, and it was of no service to myself.
Right.
And I've dropped that. But it's true. I mean, it's you argued my point exactly. It is so deeply personal what an album does to you. I mean, I can't tell you my favorite artist. It depends on the day.
Wow.
Sometimes I'm bummed and I'm into one thing. Sometimes I'm stoked and I want to listen to 90s hip hop. It's like It depends on the day. So it's too personal and too fluid for me to land on something. I wish I could, but I just can't think that way.
And I wonder if you agree with me on this. That's cool. That's like this abdication of needing to control and quantify and delineate like the merit of certain cultural milestones. Mm-hmm. I like to surround myself with people who don't talk about, oh, the music industry is so unfair, it's all going to hell, blah, 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 versus saying, well, music is a powerful thing. We don't understand it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can do other things and be flexible and figure out how to be involved with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important too. Like, instead of looking back at how albums sold more 15 years ago, okay, what can we do to like make more music cheaply, right?
Yeah, I mean, that time, that's gone. It's over. We're never going to go back to how it was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that someone younger than you and I is going to figure out how to like really, profit, for everyone to profit off of music again in the way that people once did. But my interest is in how can we make it better, and it's the Wild West right now. I mean, there are good things about it. Like I remember how hard it was, to find good. I mean, even when we had like torrenting, I thought like Bittersweet Symphony was by Oasis for 10 years because like LimeWire told me it. I mean, it was like, it was difficult, and now we can just access anything at any time. And that's so cool. And I'm at times envious of kids nowadays,
right?
Because they're so open to so much, and we had to really search, before all that even. And, so I think we should make it better, and it's our duty as music creators.
Because I find the real the lifers with the music industry, even if they end up doing side hustles or whatever, they can't stop being infatuated and in love with music and awed by the mystery and the fact that it's like an ocean, or it's like the sun. You can appreciate it, but you can never bottle it and own it. And so much industry people like to bottle and quantify things, be like, oh, that flopped, that sucks. Oh, that's so last year. Mm-hmm. Just they try to outcool themselves by hating on things. And that is, industry. I wonder if as a producer, you are abjured from that. Like you don't have to be around that kind of business vibes.
There's a lot of people that are around it. I'm not around it because I made a decision early on to work with more indie artists, or left of center. I hate that term, but just I don't work in the pop world.
Yeah.
And I made that conscious decision. And at times I'm like, damn, I wish I worked in the pop world. They're doing all right. But I can't have those conversations about we need you to sound like this and we want it to be this way and work for this spot, work in a commercial like that. I mean, I can't work that way. And I don't want to work with artists that think that way.
No.
Because that's not what I love about music. And like, that's not what took like a depressed, 14-year-old and gave me some sense of purpose in life. And I want to sustain that and make music that does that. And so I just, maybe to my own detriment, but I've sort of absolved myself from being a part of that conversation for the most part. It comes up, but
having a good manager can be a nice buffer for that, huh?
Yeah.
A good business team.
Yeah, and I chose my manager not because she was the person that chose me. She wasn't the person that promised me the most money. She was the person that promised me that she believed in my vision and who I, as a producer wanted to be and what I wanted to maintain, and that I could say yes or no to, for any reason to any project. And she'd let me, very, if I needed to come down on my rates because I really believed in someone, she'd let me do that. And
that's cool.
Yeah.
Talking about growth and change, something that I don't know if you've talked about on podcasts, maybe you have, something we have in common is neither of us drinks.
It's true.
And I think that's tight.
It is pretty tight.
Some people drink, it's fine, but
yeah.
And I think you've been, for how many years have you not?
9 years.
Oh my God. 9 years.
Yeah.
Props to you, Erin.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a big, I got sober when I was 19 years old, and I was heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol. And, I had a suicide attempt, and it wasn't my first, but, the final one kind of bottomed me out, so to speak. And I was, something opened up in my head where I was willing to give another kind of life a shot. And I'm so grateful I did, because, man, these last 9 years were not to have been missed. It's crazy that at 19 years old, I thought there was nothing left to live for. And like what's happened in the last 9 years, like it terrifies me that it almost never happened, and I mean, in this industry, we see people die all the time. I've lost probably 30 friends since I got sober, especially with like heroin, it's terrifying. But yeah, I mean, we're here, and
yeah, and that's heavy stuff. And I think that in the industry, especially the entertainment industry and the music industry, there's this idea where if I put on a very happy face and make everyone laugh or make everyone feel a certain way, then I don't have to actually deal with what's going on. And if I can then mask that with substances, then I'm numb to the fact that this is like creating this discordant feeling,
Yeah.
And I think that like it's really cool to talking about community, having friends in the sober community who are also in the entertainment community. And
Totally.
I wonder like how that is for you when you're working. Do bands ever say, "Hey, Erin, let's have a beer"? Or is it weird, or they kind of just respect that? Oh, you're here to work.
I mean, most people heavily respect it, and I'll usually, I don't go into detail with everyone, but I'll usually say like, yeah, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. I've actually been sober for a while, because you never know who's gonna maybe hear that and think like, oh, damn, really? And sometimes people ask a lot of questions. Sometimes people say, oh, that's cool, but I'm very rarely met with any negativity about it. But like what you're saying before, like I grew up in like a kind of DIY, like punk indie rock scene, and the darkness was really sort of celebrated, and for me it was figuring out another way of life where I don't have to, it's so much creativity is associated with, I see you as someone that is so joyful and happy, and you have that community, and I know that sometimes that's hard to keep up, as you just said, and we do things. Thanks. And we do things to sort of counterbalance that, and to see you lead with such positivity is so like inspiring, and it's cool that can be celebrated now, and like in the scene that I came from, like that wasn't necessarily celebrated, and it was cool to like be depressed and suicidal, and all our idols were, right, and like
right.
My idols have kind of changed, and most of those idols ended up getting sober or dying really young, so.
Usually one or the other.
Right. And I mean, like half the industry is sober. The other half probably needs to be, for the most. They're the exceptions, but.
Yeah, and I thought of an interesting like turn of a phrase, like your idols are sometimes secretly suicidal. Like that's like suicidal. It's like a pun there. I
totally.
mean, and it's not like you have to be, but I found that if someone has like a joy, or like they're getting a lot done and they're well adjusted and horrible things have happened and they're like keeping that, they're just maintaining. Sometimes you learn, oh, they don't drink. Interesting. But sometimes they do. But I'm just saying it's interesting to learn that about people, because some people don't want to talk about it. And I found on tour, people want to buy me beer and I say, oh, I'll have a Diet Coke. Thanks. Mm-hmm. And people respect that. And the people who don't respect it are people who sometimes have a problem themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. The only people that ever give a shit are people that need to that usually have a problem themselves. And there's something else you just said that made me think of something. I'm blanking. Oh, and the other thing about it is like, the longevity that you talked about, like it can be difficult if you are a person that drinks like you or I did to have any sort of longevity, but it also really screws up your hearing. It's not good for your
drinking screws up your hearing.
Yeah. And a lot of drugs. I mean, I just was remixing a Richard Hell record from 1981.
Woo. That's
been redone like 3 times already. And it was a really cool project, and Nick Zinner from the Yeah Yeah Yeahs was producing. And I mean, man, like Richard Hell, who punk icon, like started the whole CBGB's movement essentially. He was, out of his mind shooting coke every 10 minutes when they made that record. Like I everyone around him was using, and the record, I mean, so much was horribly done engineering wise,
right.
Because they could, you don't hear properly, and we're like making up for those mistakes. And I find that often, like I can tell like, man, this engineer might have, was clearly not totally on his game when they were doing his or her game.
So now you are right. Having to
make up for these like cokehead mistakes, I mean, I don't want to speak for this engineer.
Yeah,
like,
you don't know.
But
you're right. If that's the community, and that was like, it's interesting also thinking about punk rock in New York in that era. Mm-hmm. And speaking of which, the older punk era, didn't you work on a Damned record recently?
I did. Yeah, I mixed with Tony a new Damned record.
That's tight.
Yeah, it was awesome. Tony produced it as well. It's cool working with these, these like legends that I like really, worshipped growing up, that I never didn't know if they were still alive. But it's so dope to have like a piece of that.
So I wonder, Erin, so this topic, and if it's boring or you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. But what can men in the industry do when like other men might seem kind of old school or sexist or inappropriate to try to quell that? Because I don't want you to feel like you're a token person answering this question, but like
Sure.
as a woman, I'm sure you've experienced like sexism or inappropriate stuff. And how can allies like myself and a lot of listeners help fight that, especially in the music industry?
Yeah, I mean, my old boss was real good about that, Tony. Like he's such a respected legend in the industry, and he always made sure to let people know that I was there to engineer, and that I was a lot of people assumed I was his secretary or something like that. And sometimes I was in uncomfortable situations, and he had to step in and say like, hey, she's my engineer. She's really good at what she does. And, you have no right to be saying what you're saying right now. Stuff like that, but you never want to like I guess there's times where it could make the woman uncomfortable. But I think like inviting women into the studio, and listening to women and asking what they individually need or how you can help them is always a good idea, because everyone's different, and not just women, like, trans, people of different gender expressions or queer people, or, I mean, I know in your community there's more diversity, but in my music world, diversity is still a huge problem. And just inviting any people in and asking how you can help and how you can support. And if you hear someone, just like what locker room talk, whatever that bullshit is, like, just stop it, just be like, hey, like, they're actually really good at what they do, or like, I'm actually uncomfortable by you saying that right now, or like, this is not how things go anymore. Just
or be like, it's 2019, that's not funny.
Yeah,
you sound like a boomer. That's
right.
The internet talk, right?
That's a good burn. Yeah. Just burn them,
And if they're a boomer, say, you sound like the greatest generation, you're not so great. But that's interesting. So yeah, I'm sometimes, and especially on tour, like women tour managers and women and trans people, like working in selling merch and in bars, when people are guard is down and they're drunk, they can just be monsters. And
totally.
I imagine, hopefully, as a producer, people are a little more professional when they know they got to create this album. But I'm sure you've had horror stories, and we don't have to get into it, but weird situations.
Yeah, I mean, I've had like cyber bullies that just like hear about me and then like attack me. I had this guy write like a multiple page essay to me about how like I shouldn't be wearing makeup or like girls' clothes. I mean, it was just like psychotic, and it's just this extra labor that we have to deal with, But I'm also like a white woman. Like, there's people that have it a lot harder than I do, and I try to be there to lift other people up as well. So I think it's on all of us to like help someone that maybe doesn't have the privilege that we have, and whether that's having a conversation with someone that has some problematic point of views, or inviting them into the studio, or giving them an opportunity, or just like listening, like starting with that, and having that level of respect is where we can all start.
That's really good.
And hire them,
Right. And give them a chance, because Tony gave you a chance.
Totally.
You came in with a great reel, and he was like, all right, this woman is ready.
Totally.
Can we talk a little bit about Blackstar?
Sure.
So Bowie's last record, well, you worked with him on a lot of things, but you were really involved in that record, huh? Mm-hmm. Did y'all know that he wasn't doing so well, or was that?
Yeah, and I don't like want to say a ton on that of respect for him, but we did know. There was very few people that knew, and we did know. And it was incredible to see someone with that amount of dedication and want to like create this gift for his fans when he could have just been off on an island, like, enjoying the remainder of his time. We did not know the time frame, and we were still hopeful, but yeah, it was he pushed himself and was incredible, and you wouldn't have known working with him, other than certain attributes that happen when someone's battling cancer, but he was just tough and pushed through and so joyful. A lot of people like see this album as this like dark sort of, his like final eulogy, some sort of, and it was, I mean, making the album was like everything, but it was like so full of light and love and joy, and it was so much fun and so much humor involved, and it's funny, the what people will put on something after the fact.
Do you think he knew it was his last record?
At the time, I was hopeful. Looking back, I'm like, looking back and looking at those lyrics again and stuff, I'm like, damn, you know, I this is total, you know, I don't know, but damn, I mean, he was thought one step ahead of all of us, and I can't help but think now, like, you know, a lot of that was on purpose, I think. Because
he was from another plane.
Totally.
Oh, man. And so it must have been interesting because people, you see his face on shirts all over Brooklyn, and you knew him as David, or you were a friend and a colleague of his, and it must have been. Was it weird when he passed? Everyone was trying to be like, "Oh, are you like trying to express empathy?" But when someone famous like that passes, does it get annoying, or did it feel like, what was that whole thing like?
It was so like truly psychedelic and surreal and bizarre, and I remember thinking beforehand, you know, man, if this happens, that'll be weird and I might be annoyed, you know. But the reality of it was like that the year after the following year, like following his passing, I was traveling a lot, and all over the world, like I was able to hear people like tell me what he meant to them. And it was such a beautiful experience to know that I knew this person, and I have, you know, nothing but wonderful memories of him. I mean, he was so kind, so welcoming to me, so intelligent, so funny, so authentic, and such a fan of music and of other people's artistry. That he was such a special person in my life personally, and to know that he had this impact on so many people was actually really beautiful, and actually helped with, like, you know, the grieving process and the magnitude of what had just happened. I mean, it was bizarre. I've never experienced anything like that, to be personally grieving someone that the whole world is grieving. I remember going on Facebook, and it was just everything, and every site you went on was just nonstop, you know, everyone talking about him. And I was like, damn, you know, like, what an impact this person had. And I mean, there was this one like meme that said like how many years of how old the planet is, and it was like the world is, I'm totally gonna misquote how is, you know, billion years old, and we were lucky enough to be on the planet at the same time as David Bowie. And I was like, damn. And
you're like, I was lucky enough to work on music with him.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it was huge. I'm still pinching myself.
Yeah. And there must have been something healing in like grieving a friend, but then seeing that they had an influence on people on a personal level as well.
Yeah.
That there's, in his case, his soul lived on, or his energy will live forever.
Truly. Yeah.
And it's crazy, Erin. That's that's like, must have been a heavy, I bet for like, when you first heard the news, what was that first few days like?
I mean, I was like, it was in the middle of the night, and a friend called me because they had just heard, and none of us. I thought it wasn't true, because I assumed like the kind of inner circle would have found out first, and then, you know, and I started calling Tony, who was like overseas, and I had to wake him up in the middle of the night, and you know, I wanted to make sure he was okay, and it was kind of like an out of body experience, and the record had just come out, you know, and I thought I was going to see him again and get to thank him for, you know, really truly thank him for letting me be a part of it, which I think I did, but not in the way that I would have, you know, wanted to, and what that really meant for me, that, you know, he gave me a shot, and it was heavy, and everywhere I went, the record was playing, you know, but it was really like a beautiful way to sort of grieve, and yeah, it goes back to like why we, you know, what is our ultimate goal, is that we, like, people hear us and they like feel us, and we live on, and we have a legacy, you know, and the stories people would tell me about how he, you know, how he changed their lives or saved their lives or made them feel okay being different and all these things. It was like, damn, like, that's the goal. You know, and I had a tiny part in in it. And
yeah. And that last album was such an impactful, amazing album.
Yeah.
That I wonder now, when you listen back to it, do you still hear like the things you mixed and engineered individually, or does it become, like we were talking about earlier, this cohesive like painting statue? Like, how is it now? Do you listen to that record, or is it weird?
I have listened to it for sure. And I have mostly just really good memories about making it, and I'm like, I can remember like, oh, I remember when, he did that vocal or came up with that line, or I remember when, Donnie, the sax player, played that in the studio and this funny joke, stuff like that. But I'm able to appreciate it as like a body of work that was, that was all came from David's head, and it was, and it's what it, just step back and then look at it as a cohesive piece of work is like, whoa, that was, really, really brilliant. And I saw it come together piecemeal and working through the process. But, to be able to step back, sometimes it's hard for me to like even listen to music, period,
right,
nowadays.
Yeah.
Cause I'm always dissecting stuff. And I believe
Tell
I'll
me
always,
about it.
yeah. I mean, we don't hear music like our, parents, my parents aren't musicians. I don't think MC Bob and DJ Kathy.
Yeah, no, they're not professional musicians.
Yeah, they hear music differently than we do. We'll always be able to pick out, most people can't pick out a bass line, and it's like,
that's true.
Oh, whoa. They're like, oh, can you hear separate parts of this song? I'm like, yeah, what?
And you probably could tell what mics they used.
Well, I can tell when something's off or something, I can venture to guess sometimes.
Let me ask you something that like, I'm really curious to hear your opinion on this. You've worked with so many artists over the years. Seeing Bowie's process, what made him different, and what, like, did he approach recording differently than other people, or like how was his process different from other artists you work with?
I mean, what struck me about him, it's not different from everyone, but he didn't take himself too seriously, He knew to, like, kind of, like, pause for a bit and, like, watch some funny YouTube videos, stuff like that, and really just enjoy the process. He also knew, he hired the best, the best people. He had the best musicians, the best producer, and he knew when to let them do their thing, which I think a lot of artists forget sometimes for the sake of maybe ego or maybe fear. And he didn't have that. He also wasn't self-referential at all, which I found very interesting. He was never talking about ways he did things before or anything like that. He was talking about what he loved about all different sorts of stuff. And he was willing to hear my opinion. I was the youngest person in the room, and he always wanted to know what I thought, what I thought should be done to it. And I think that's why he was the artist that he was and had such a long career that was, pretty much maintained, and known as this person that took on so many different genres and styles, because he was always, wanting to look at the youngest person in the room or the most different person in the room and see what they were doing, and knew how to make that, into something of his own. Those are things that really struck me about him.
That's cool. And through his career, like, being influenced by people like Trent Reznor and the different eras of music, which kept him relevant. It's really interesting that you have this personal anecdote of, as he really respected and valued what you had to say.
Totally.
It's pretty dope, Erin.
Yeah, it was very dope.
So what are you working on now? Can you talk about anything you're working on?
Yeah, so I just did that. I did the mix with Richard Hell and Nick Zinner of Destiny Street, which was really cool to kind of take this, record by a punk icon that was recorded back then and give it fresh ears and put kind of, make it sound like something was rebirthed in 2019, essentially. It's I'm excited about it. It's going to come out on Record Store Day, I think, and that was so cool to work with, like, two of my idols. Like, Nick Zinner is, like, one of my favorite guitarists of all time, and the Yeah has meant so much to me. And it was so cool to see them work together as well.
That's awesome.
And I'm doing actually, like, a lot of mixing right now. Like, talking about how we stay afloat in this industry, you know? And I've also produced a couple tracks for Sad 13, which is Sadie from Speedy Ortiz's solo project, which is some cool stuff. And and then, like I said, a lot of mixing. I'm doing a lot of kind of different stuff right now. I'm trying to sort of broaden my horizons of who and what I work with. I want to be more open-minded to looking at different genres and seeing, you know, how I can bring what I do and combine it with something that's outside of, well, you know, my comfort zone, I guess. Because it's the same skill set, you know, it's just different styles of music. So
that's interesting you say that, because even with different instruments, the end goal is still the same, you're saying. Sure.
And if you've been doing it long enough, like you know how, you know, and you know what many different instruments sound like, you know how to do, you know, engineer well or mix them well. And I just want to like learn more and be exposed to more. And I was in a very like indie rock. Well, I did a lot of other types of records too, I guess. But you know, it's the same fundamental skill set, but it's changing your idea about how things are supposed to sound. So like, for instance, like the level that a kick drum has in a rock track is different than what it's going to have in a hip hop track, and just stuff like that of just retuning your ears to like, oh, actually, like, you know, what's, you know, in a pop, which pop in this, you know, any popular music, which could be rock or hip hop or, you know, country, whatever, like the lead vocal is king. But then I just did this record with like this experimental artist where the lead vocal was just another one of the instruments. So it's about finding that balance and carving out space for the other instruments more so than the lead vocal, which, you know, sort of denies logic of a lot of other genres, and everything kind of calls for something different. And it's fun to like, it's the same skill set. It's just like opening your mind a little more, I guess.
It's interesting how you're disciplined to become like a flexible, happy, like sober person has been about like finding balance and order from the chaos, right?
Yeah.
And so people absolutely come to you with like, and I wonder, I'm sure this happens a lot for you and other mixers. You get the sessions, but you weren't there for the recording, right?
Right.
And so then you're kind of like trying to decipher the energy of what was in the room and try to like put it together. And that must be fun, but also sometimes like a totally different thing than being there from the start, right?
Totally. And it's always, there's so much value into being there from the start and being informed about what the intention is of the artist and of the song, and being there for little passing comments where the drummer's like, oh, you know, the snare would sound tight if we put like a slapback on, you know, I mean, just little comments like that you file away and you're like, oh yeah, that does fit the arrangement. But then when I'm sent files and I have no idea what went on, it can be a real challenge. And that comes down to communication with the artist and being able to translate what they want and what they're saying, because, you know, most people don't come from an engineering background, and I don't expect them to. And I'm all about like, describe it in words that make sense to you. Like if you want to give me like, what color is this song? You know, like where do you see, like, what's the music video gonna, you know, what do you envision the music video look like? Because that can inform what I'm gonna make it sound like. You know, if they envision they're in a field and singing and there's like, you know, stars all around, they're like, okay, like I get how that sounds, you know, rather than trying to expect them to speak my language. I also am like with mixing pretty strict on like, I don't want the mixes to be attended for the first few rounds. Like I kind of need to do my thing and focus when I have like the artist there. It causes problems for kind of just my process of like getting things kind of where they need to be, doing my piece, and then inviting the artist in for feedback and for changes.
You're like a sculptor.
Yeah. And I need like a minute, you know, to, and some artists are insistent on being there the whole time, and it's tough for me.
Yeah. Oh gosh. You know, I've never sat in on a mixing session where I've been trying to give. I've been there where producers mixing a track, but where they want me to like work with them on it, and I could see how that would be annoying if you're in the flow, and they're like, sure. "Yo, I'm too quiet. My voice too quiet." You're like, "Give me that note later."
It's not even necessarily annoying, even if they're quiet. It's something about like That's my like weird creative process where like someone wouldn't want you to watch them write, when they're still like, it takes a little while for them to want you to hear the song that they're working on.
Right.
Like that's kind of like how it is. It's like almost like I can't get into my zone when I know someone else is there watching, because I might try 7 different things before I land on the right, reverb for something, or I might try I might want to explore a certain route and then go back from it. And when you have someone standing over you that's nervous about how their song's going to turn out, you feel a little bit less free to explore. And also like there's stuff that the artist doesn't want to hear, like you fixing their vocals or
right. It's the energy thing too.
Yeah.
They're nervous about it.
Yeah.
That's interesting, Erin. I wanted to end with a question, which I'm sure you get asked all the time, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What would you tell a young Gen Z person who wants to be a producer, that what can they do to like take the steps to try to maybe one day reach the level of success you have? And is there advice you would give them?
I say like find your community and start working with them. Like that's the most important thing, is to find your community, your niche, what you do really well, what's really cool about you, and focus on that, and build from there. All these like, there's so many stories of people coming up with people from their communities, like they happen to produce the record of their buddy who blew up overnight, and that's, it's not always the end goal, but I think that's the most important part. What you spoke to, like, that's the coolest thing about music, is we have this like community of friends that we get to like work with. And that's so tight. And
so like a scene. So like,
find your scene. That's step one for sure. And then just, there's so much information out there, and you can find so much on YouTube or tutorials about how to do stuff, but get yourself into any sort of studio situation, or get yourself a home setup and start really setting up microphones and learning about how they sound and playing around, and like just use your ears. Your ears will tell you a lot more than any YouTube tutorial can, and you can read and watch all you want, but until you're putting this stuff into practice, you're not really gonna learn it.
Because you're going to do, like with songwriting, I'm sure you'll have 100 bad mixes till you have like start making great ones.
Totally.
You got to write those 100 bad songs, maybe 500 bad songs.
Oh yeah. I used to have like 15 mix passes. Now I do usually cap out at 3, it's
that's tight.
And
Do you wear ear protection at shows?
Always.
Me too. High five.
High five.
I think if
like nerds.
If I hadn't done that, I read an interview with Adam in his package, and he talked about how that was important for any touring artist.
Absolutely.
And because I've worn earplugs, every time I walk in a venue, every time I hear someone sound checking, my hearing isn't as bad as it would have been.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I know people that are like nearly deaf, and they're trying to still work. It's kind of heartbreaking. You
As a
can't
producer.
get that back. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's like a painter not being able to see.
Totally. And musicians that can't hear for shit, that sucks.
Yeah.
It's your whole life. So
Drummers, especially, be careful.
Yeah, oof.
So when you're mixing, I always wondered this. Do you try to, some mixers mix loud, some producers and mixing engineers mix loudly? Like, how about you? I
do not mix loudly. I mix quietly, and sometimes it's important to get it. I'm usually at like a comfortable level. Sometimes it's important to make it really quiet, so and then you really hear what's popping out the most. Like a lot of times, like you turn it down and make sure the lead vocal's the thing that's sticking out the most. You can really hear like any real balance issues. But whenever I have to crank it up for an artist, I'm like cringing, because I just don't like it loud.
Yeah.
It's difficult to you get ear fatigue, for one thing, and it's not as accurate of a way to listen.
Right. And most people are going to listen like on their computer speakers anyway.
Right.
So you want to mix for that. That's cool. So that means you won't destroy your ears mixing.
Totally.
That's good.
Totally.
Erin, where can the of the pod follow you on social media? Do you have, or where can people learn more about you is a better question.
Man, I need to redo my website. So I just say find me on Instagram for now. It's at Erin Tonkon, Tonkon.
And people can see your process in your life.
Yeah. I can see what I'm up to, and my dogs and life. And once I start launching this company, I'll provide more information for that, because I think it's going to help a lot of people and really help our community. So
That's amazing.
Stay tuned.
And if anyone out there is looking for a great producer, they can DM you, or if they have Skrill, have cheddar, they need to invest.
Sure. Or, let me know, or email my manager.
There you go. And okay, cool. Erin, this has been great. Thanks.
It's been great, Andrew.
But hold on. Where can I find your manager's info?
Oh, I mean, just find me on Instagram or email. My email's on there.
Okay.
Email me. I mean, if you want to be taken seriously, send an email,
Don't slide in them DMs.
Don't slide into them DMs. That's for commenting on pictures and content, not for work inquiries.
Speaking of DMs, that's how Ashley and I first communicated after meeting. Instagram DMs.
Oh, really?
Because
I think I knew that.
You knew that. She tagged me in a haiku, and then we hung out that night.
And she tried to pull it off like there was nothing going on for too long. And I knew that shady wife of yours was up to something.
Did you know she had come out to visit me?
Yeah, no, I knew that. And she slept on the couch.
Right. And I told Claire, but Claire didn't know.
She's like, oh, I knew that. Well,
oh, boy.
Don't tell Claire, but I knew that. But she was trying to pull it off like you all were just...
Friends. Now we're married.
Now you're married.
And your speech was so good at the wedding.
I will never forget seeing Ashley walking down the aisle, looking at you, and you were crying, and I lost it. It was beautiful.
I know. So it was during the dress rehearsal. It's like, or the rehearsal the day before. It's like, oh wow, it's emotional. And then during the wedding, it hit me. But your speech was a highlight, and it's cool that through music and life and everything, having friends that you connect with who are in your life, in the business, and outside, is like, those are rare and special. And I consider you a special friend, Erin.
It's a true gift. You're a special friend too, Andrew. You always bring joy to my life.
Thanks, Erin. All right, cool. Well, this has been a good long interview, but Erin, what should we end with? What song? I always like to have guests end with something they've worked on. And you can tell me later if I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh my God. Man, let me tell you later.
Okay.
I have to think about that.
And then I'll introduce. So this is the song I talked about in the intro. Here it is. All right, bye.
tears I cry. 'Tis a pity she was alone. 'Tis my fate, I suppose. For that was patrol. That was patrol. 'Tis a pity she was alone.
Beautiful stories, beautiful inspiration. Thank you, Erin. That was great. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the Patreon Larson of the week. Let's see who left a message.
Hi, Lars, or Andrew as I know you. I am proud to be one of your first Patreon supporters. But then as your mom, that would make sense. I have loved listening to your Patreon songs, reading your studio diaries, listening to your podcasts, and going to your concerts. I remember going to one of your concerts and putting my hand out to be stamped. The person at the door said, "No need to stamp your hand. We know who you are." I had to chuckle. Was that because I was one of the oldest at the concert, or because I was your mom? It has been a pleasure and an honor to grow up with you, and I have loved all of the podcasts. I have especially loved listening to those with your school and music friends. I know them all, and listening to you interact with them has been such a delight. I have learned much. Some backstories I did not know. I guess a mom just doesn't know everything that goes on. And it has been such a pleasure to hear about how each friend and colleague has followed his own path to develop his creativity. Thank you for enriching my world and helping me find my path to my own creativity. I remember the day you just said to me, "Just do it, Mom." That is exactly what you are doing, and I am so proud of you. It is a pleasure to be your mom. Keep on sharing your joy and chuckles with the world. I love you, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. I love you too. I appreciate you calling in and giving me that beautiful story. And I'm glad to be your son. And I know you have a million MC Lars shirts, but guess what? You just got one more. Next week, we have the great Luke Ski, who's a parody artist, a comedian, an animator, a great dude. We talk about his struggles, his role in the Dr. Demento Funny Music Project, inspired movement of art and music, and we talk about his life in LA. So check that out. Erin, thanks for being on the show. We'll see you all next week. Peace.